Hello and thank you for attending my PowerPoint presentation on the Stellaron Hunters. This PowerPoint, unlike my usual ones, will be focused on both lore and gameplay. It will also be linked in the description so you can check and click on all the citations you see yourself. The Stellaron Hunters are a small and mysterious group of very powerful individuals who are all wanted by the IPC. They all have huge bounties, the lowest one being Silverwolf at, if I recall correctly, 5.1 billion credits. And despite that, they still pay their taxes properly, according to Topaz, which is kinda strange. Anyway, they follow the finality, which makes them the first group of people we meet who follow that Eon. Like, in 2.3 it was implied at best by Jade, but in 3.0 we got straight up confirmation by Kafka mentioning the finality. Currently, the Stellaron Hunters have 5 members. They are led by Elio. Elio is not playable yet and is often implied to be portrayed as a black cat in various media of the Stellaron Hunters. He does not participate in their missions personally, at least now he doesn't. But he does give the other scripts to aid them, which can predict future events. I'll go more in depth into each individual member later on. Kafka is physically incapable of feeling fear. She joined because she wanted to feel fear. As for gameplay wise, she is a lightning nihility character that spearheads the Dot archetype. Firefly, also known as Sam, controls an insanely powerful suit of armor from Glamoth's Iron Cavalry. She joined because she wanted to live and defy her fate of having entropy loss syndrome. Gameplay wise, she's a fire destruction unit that can do very powerful super break damage, at least when you pair her with Harmblazer. Blade is an immortal who has an insane healing factor. He wants to die but can't. He joined because he was promised to be able to finally die. Gameplay-wise, he revolves around draining and healing his own health. Silverwolf is a legendary hacker from Punklord who can hack reality itself through a technique called ether editing. She views reality as a game and joined out of a boredom, I guess? It's not super clear. Gameplay-wise, she can implant weaknesses and powerful defense threat, but is limited by only being single target. Lastly, the Trailblazer, which is to say our main character, used to be a member of the Stellaron Hunters. He is an artificial body created to host the Stellaron, and was raised by Kafka according to her companion mission. But her memory was wiped before the events of the game. Okay, technically, there isn't actually confirmation that Elio is the Black Cat, but the fact that there is a Black Cat that appears in a surprising amount of Stellaron Hunters media is suspicious to say the least. And especially when you account for the achievement, Save the Cat, which is if you win a battle with a team comprising of Silverwolf, Kafka, Blade, and Firefly. The rest of this slide is more theory and my own thoughts, but he can create scripts which can accurately predict the future. This does line up with Terminus the Finality, which is moving backwards in time instead of forwards in time. If they do come from the future, then it is fitting and it does make sense that Elio can predict it, which highly implies that Elio is most likely an Emanator, but at least a Pathstrider of the Finality. I mean, it's heavily implied, but it's not outright confirmed again, which does create an interesting dynamic with the Trailblaze. The Trailblaze and the Finality fundamentally oppose each other. The Finality is the end of all paths, which is to say, like, it's the destination. But the Trailblaze is about the journey, at least I'm pretty sure that's one interpretation of it, which fundamentally oppose each other, but we as the Astral Express often work together with the Stellaron Hunters to help various planets that are plagued with Stellarons. Silverwolf originates from a planet that is literally called Punklord. Her belief that life is just a video game is Punklord mentality and is fairly common there. She does also play basically any and every game. In Punklord, people work in teams. because there's a belief that loners don't last long, but those who do last long become legends. On top of a lot of the gaming, and specifically arcade gaming, from what we can tell from her story, there's also a lot of hacking in the culture. With the technique known as the aforementioned ether editing, expert hackers can edit reality itself, as we see in a very early cutscene in the game. He also kinda breaks the fourth wall occasionally, but not really. She mentions elements in games, like she frequently mentions pulling, but it's not specifically HSR, so I don't think it's quite breaking the fourth wall, but it's coming really close. And her motivations for joining the Stellaron Hunters are much more unclear than the others. Like, the others are very clear-cut, but for Silverwolf, it's not that explicitly written as far as I can find, so yeah. Based on what I can tell though, she was just bored and the Stellaron Hunters got to her first, before the IPC or the Nameless or whatever. In terms of combat, Silverwolf is a Quantum Nihility unit, which specializes in applying many debuffs to support the team. She was the first of the Stellaron Hunters to be released, if you exclude the Trailblazer at least. Unfortunately, she has been power crept into oblivion. She's getting a rerun in 3.0, but for meta purposes, don't pull for her. In her main niche nowadays, which is an Acheron team, Jiao Qiu can outclass her in general. Like, Jiao Qiu Pella is generally better than, like, Jiao Qiu Silverwolf or Silverwolf Pella, at the same cost of one feature 5-star. But if you like Silverwolf as, like, her playstyle or her character, feel free, she still works fine. Like, back in 1.1, we also thought that she would be resistant to bar creep due to her signature weakness implanting, but they just made stuff implant weaknesses on their own without the team restrictions of Silverwolf. Like, Firefly and Boothill can now implant their own weaknesses, or they can just ignore weaknesses outright in the case of Rappa or Acheron or Fei Xiao. These weakness implants or ignores don't ignore the 20% res that enemies have to elements that they aren't weak to, but it's still not really worth using Silverwolf over. So as for Blade, I have a PowerPoint on the High Cloud Quintet, either coming soon or already out, depending on which one of these two I feel like editing first. Blade's backstory before the Stellaron Hunters has been or will be more thoroughly explored there, so I'll focus more on his relations with the Hunters in this one. Interestingly, Kafka can control the Mara that Blade suffers from with her Spirit Whisper, which can give us insight on how Mara in general works. Also, a funny thing is that he doesn't really use his phone outside of missions, so the others just borrow it to mess around. All of Silverwolf, Kafka, and Firefly have used his phone to text us, which is funny. Blade was released in the first half of 1.2, and he is a HP scaling attacker. His kit revolves around draining his own health and taking damage and recovering health. His HP scaling is the core of his problems. There are no HP buffing supports yet, and he can't use the absurd attack buffs off like someone like Robin. There is an absolute dearth of HP buffing supports, but if Tribby ends up being a HP buffing support, he could actually become good. Like, he got a pretty good new light code in the event light code of 2.6, which is hinting towards some sort of a HP meta, like at least some HP support. So if Tribby ends up being an HP buffing support, he could actually become good. Kafka originates from a planet called Terux 5, I don't know how to pronounce that, where people literally cannot feel fear. She has an ability called Spirit Whisper, where she can control the actions of others. It seems to be indicated by her saying, "Listen to me." She has also mastered various weapons like guns, bombs, blades, whatever, right? Making her one of the most dangerous Stellaron Hunters, according to the IPC at least. She was also responsible for raising us and teaching us basic language and common sense, although it is debatable whether we have that latter one. And according to Blade, we follow Kafka, and one of the only ones who've lived, although we can't really tell the tale because, you know, amnesia, right? And Kafka is also likely one of the first recruited to the Hunters after Elio. Anyway, combat-wise, Kafka was released in the second half of 1.2, and her viability is directly tied to the viability of Dot. If Dot is good, it will be partially because of her, and if it isn't good, then she isn't good. Kafka is the only character in the entire game to be able to detonate all types of dot. She can detonate them both with her skill and her ult, on top of having a solid dot herself, which largely removes the ot in dot. I don't really have that much more to add here because I made a PowerPoint on dot as a whole, which you can check out for more details if you want. Firefly is one of the remnants of the soldiers of Glamoth's Iron Cavalry, who was genetically modified and artificially designed to fight the Swarm. The higher-ups implemented entropy loss syndrome into the Iron Cavalry, because the Glamoth's Iron Cavalry, even though they were humanoid soldiers wielding armor, they were not treated as humans and were just cloned en masse. So they implemented this entropy loss syndrome, which accelerates aging and leads to their premature death. They don't want these powerful weapons to be used against them. She joined the Stellaron Hunters to, quote, defy her fate of dying to entropy loss syndrome, which sets up an interesting parallel between her and Blade, which I'll elaborate more in a bit. It annoys me to absolutely no end that Firefly at heart is an optimistic character that looks to the future and tries to defy her predetermined future. So a lot of her character focuses on the future, but her marketing and her trailers mostly focus on the past. Like, I know it needs to be fleshed out, but like, it still annoys me to no end. Like, just elaborating on it in her character story is fine enough for me. But anyway, Firefly was by far the most recent one of the Hunters released, and she was released in 2.3 and is by far the strongest of the 4 playable Hunters as of now. Or at least if you pair her with Harmblazer. The meta is shifting away from break buffs and fire weaknesses though. In the entirety of 3.0, there is literally one fire weak enemy, and it's literally just a common peon. Like, while she can implant fire weaknesses, she doesn't just ignore the innate 20% fire res that most non-fire weak enemies have. Additionally, there's also the matter of her using Harmblazer, in a meta where Rimblazor will also be in relatively high demand. And if you do have few, honestly, Rappa is probably still better because there are actually imaginary weak enemies. Interestingly enough, despite being all wanted criminals, from our POV, they have been there whenever the planet itself isn't shut off from the outside world, yet they have never served as actual antagonists. Like, yeah, we fight them, like we fight Kafka and Firefly, but they're not actually antagonists. On the Luofu, they lured us there, but it was to let us help the Xianzhou Luofu to gain their trust and the Jade Abacus of Allying Oath. Because, well, in the final boss fight against probably Nanook, having the power of the Xianzhou Alliance on our side is going to be massively helpful. On Penacony, Firefly saves us from drowning in the depths of the memory zone, probably, and assists us in the final fight with her second death. However that happens, I'm honestly not super clear on that. On top of also revealing the existence of Dreamflux Reef to us, which is massively important in helping us defeat the Order. And these guys are basically another Found Family trope, kind of like the Astral Express. Because again, these two factions are clearly meant to be parallels. Kafka's the mom, Blade is the grumpy dad, Firefly and Silverwolf are the older and younger sisters. It's really funny to see. Like, and within the Stellaron Hunters, there's the parallel between Firefly and Blade I briefly mentioned earlier that I said I would elaborate on later. Blade is immortal, but he really wants to die, while Firefly has a drastically reduced lifespan, but wants to live. And yet they both work together and agree that immortality is really bad, like, which makes for a really interesting dynamic. Alright, hope you enjoy and thanks for watching. I wanted to focus more on lore because frankly I didn't feel like making solo character PowerPoints for old characters that probably won't do that well anyway. If I haven't uploaded the Cloud Quintet one, it'll probably be coming soon, and yeah, alright, bye.